Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where I think you'll forgive me for steering clear of the giant orange balloon. It doesn't seem to me to be the most important issue facing the capital city, the country, or indeed the world this morning. But the man depicted in that balloon possibly is. It's also Thursday, thank God, so we've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12. We're out of the football, Brexit's falling apart at the seams, and the worst president in the history of America is coming to visit London. Thank God for Mystery Hour, is all I could say today. Before that, however, we have to deal with the other two issues. And on the Trump question, how important is it now for people to admit that there's a lot of things they don't understand, and putting faith in someone who almost fetishizes ignorance is probably an extremely dangerous thing to do. Because it seems to me that almost everything now is about complication and trust. Things are complicated, and we kind of like the people who make us think that they're not. Because the people that we trusted before, it feels like they've let us down. I think this is where I'm thinking out loud, so bear with me a little bit. The phone lines are open if you want to stage an intervention and interrupt my contemplations. I think a lot about that phrase. I know it was slightly misrepresented when Michael Gove talked about the country had had enough of experts. He added something like from organisations with strange acronyms, but it did spoke to something, didn't it, that had sort of taken hold on both sides of the Atlantic. And if you're being charitable about it, because I'm still not ready to conclude that every single person who likes the cut of Donald Trump's jib is solely seduced by the fact that he kind of allowed racism back into the mainstream. There must be more nuanced, more sympathetic reasons than that. But then you begin to wonder what's on the other side of the scales, putting babies without their parents in courtrooms. How can there be anything on the other side of the scale that balances that out? How could anybody, for example, today be more exercised by a balloon than they are by the fact that Donald Trump cozies up to a foreign leader who ordered the murder of British citizens on British soil? I mean, it genuinely baffles me, but as you'll know if you're kind enough to listen on a regular basis, everything baffles me at the moment. And that issue of complication and trust, I don't know enough to have a strong opinion on NATO, actually. I have a trust in the status quo. But then, if we start talking about Donald Trump criticising NATO, how many people would be aware that Jeremy Corbyn is an on-the-record critic of NATO as well, arguably an enemy of what NATO represents? And how many people are aware that some of Jeremy Corbyn's closest advisors remain in thrall to the Kremlin? So I can say, I mean, this is what I mean by complicated, because, forgive me if I'm about to describe you. Hopefully you'll take it as a warning rather than an insult. But if you're the kind of person that sort of thinks, oh, he's slagging off Donald Trump, must be a lefty Corbyn lover, then your thickness now has reached a level that is threatening international security. Jeremy Corbyn is arguably a Kremlin sympathiser. Certainly some of his closest advisors are. Donald Trump isn't really a Kremlin sympathiser. Increasingly it looks as if he's doing what he's told by the Kremlin. And that would involve undermining the West. I can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth, and some corners of my profession are talking about balloons. Donald Trump could be about to undermine the West, and that spooks me out until the other voice in my head says, yeah, but Corbyn's anti-NATO as well, so why are you getting your knickers in a twist? Well, I'm not a fan of Jeremy Corbyn, as anybody who listens to this programme with ears that work will know. But equally, that is almost comforting, because you'd think that a British politician who appears to be altruistic and idealistic rather than entirely psychopathic and depraved has somehow ended up with the same attitude towards NATO. So you could almost be reassured. I told you this was complicated. And this is Trump's appeal, isn't it? Is that he just spares people the knowledge of how complicated things are. But why can't he just use that position to tell everybody that one of the main reasons why we've had peace in the Second World War since the Second World War in continental Europe, I mean, mostly, is the existence of these rules-based international institutions. It's the existence of supranational organisations like NATO, like the European Union, like the United Nations. Why can't he use his power for peace? I don't know. Well, the only answer I've got is because Vladimir Putin doesn't want him to. Vladimir Putin desperately desires to see the breakdown of structure in the West, and that would include, most obviously, the European Union, mission accomplished, in part, and NATO, which Donald Trump yesterday made it pretty clear he doesn't like. I'm going to read you this again. I don't know whether or not this is going to work today, because I like you, just kind of want someone else to come along and make sense of it all, and obviously that person doesn't really exist. But the former American ambassador to Israel probably knows a little bit about what he's talking about, a chap called Daniel Shapiro. I read you this thread yesterday, and I'm going to read it to you again. And I wonder who's going to talk to me today, because there's no earthly way that you and me have a proper understanding of this issue, and yet what we do together every day kind of hinges upon opinion and a degree of knowledge. It's a scenario which could represent, according to a former American ambassador to Israel, a fundamental reshaping of the international order. I guess the question I'm probably going to end up with is, can anyone think of another reason why Donald Trump would do this, except that he's dancing to Vladimir Putin's tune? How could it possibly suit America and the West to have a fractured NATO, an undermined European Union, less unity, less stability, and less economic health? How can that possibly be anything other than the ambition of our enemy? And who is the biggest enemy of the West at the moment? Vladimir Putin, for reasons largely of self-interest rather than ideology. In order to keep his hands on all the money that he's stolen from the Russian people, he needs to keep the Russian people under the thumb. And the best way to keep them under the thumb is to portray Russia as mighty and the West as dissolute and corrupt. Because it's not dissolute and corrupt, he has to make it unstable and fractured. And my God, have we ever been more unstable and fractured in the West than we are now? And still people talk about the balloon. I mean, genuinely, of all the things I've sat in front of this microphone and spoken to you about over the last few years, this is the morning where I can't believe what's happened to my country. My Christian country that is full of people who bang on about British values all the time and are now more exercised by a balloon than they are by the potential reshaping of the international order. And don't take my word for that. That's the former American ambassador to Israel. Is there an analysis or an opinion of what Donald Trump is doing? Not why some people like it, because we know really why some people like what Donald Trump is doing. From the minute that he described the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis at Charlottesville in Virginia as very fine people on both sides, from that moment we know fundamentally what his base likes about him. They like the fact that he thinks Nazis are nice. And we will be reeling for generations to come at the discovery of how many people like that analysis. In fact, I would argue now, at risk of biting off even more than I can chew, I'd argue the only people unsurprised by how many Donald Trump fans were delighted when he came out in support of Nazis, the only people unsurprised by how many people fit into that category are probably Jewish people, Roma, and a few other minorities that know full well just how many of their neighbours and friends could turn on them given the right historical opportunities and circumstances. But hey, there's a balloon. And if there is an analysis of Donald Trump's behaviour towards the West and towards NATO, towards Germany and towards Britain, towards his own allies, I mean the tariffs on steel, which have already caused job losses and financial hits to American companies. Harley-Davidson moving production out of America as a direct result of tariffs on steel. Canada, their closest geographical and strategic partner, getting treated appallingly. He's treating all of America's historical allies appallingly and sucking up to America's greatest enemy, Vladimir Putin. And I just say those words out loud and then look at some of the newspaper coverage of the balloon and some of the commentary about the balloon and wonder what the hell has happened to us. I mean, seriously. Here is the most powerful man in the world, a man who is clearly depraved, both morally and politically, a man whose only interest is his ego and his self-enrichment. But of course we don't know how rich he is because he's the first American president in 50-odd years not to publish his tax returns. He has a significant following that thinks he shouldn't be held accountable. Rules shouldn't apply to him. It's a sort of key cornerstone of fascism. We need rules for all the others, but not for us, not for our people. They can go around grabbing women by the genitals or paying off pornographic actresses, lying several thousand times on the record since becoming president. The rules don't apply to him because he offers me something so wonderful. What is it? Well, he allows the vilest parts of me to be expressed. He allows the things that I've spent my whole life feeling ashamed of suddenly out into the sunlight. I'm allowed to be vile to my black neighbour now. I'm allowed to say disgusting things about all Muslims. I'm allowed to make astonishingly sexist comments about women. I'm allowed to be homophobic. I'm allowed to snigger at trans people. All of these things that the sort of right-wing newspaper columnists have spent their entire careers railing against, Donald Trump has just disinfected completely. He's going, yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm the president of America. There's a bunch of Nazis over there, and I think there's some very fine people among them. So it is just depraved. But when you move beyond the self-serving and his complete understanding of the gullible mark, I mean, his entire life is built upon selling rubbish to people for far much more than it's worth. So and that's what he did as president. He sold complete rubbish to people for far much more than it's worth. And I kind of get all of that. It breaks my heart to see how venal and how nasty some of our fellow humans are. And again, I guess the only people unsurprised by this would be Jewish people. But the international questions, I don't get. But why would he want to undermine NATO? It doesn't suit America in any way, shape or form. Yes, some NATO members should be spending more of their budgets on defence spending. But, do you know, there was one question asked yesterday, why do you spend 10 times more on defence than Russia does? And they don't really have an answer. I suspect the closest we'll get to a non-Putin the puppet master analysis of Donald Trump's international relations would probably be he's trying to drum up business for the American arms companies. He's trying to make Germany spend more money on American ordnance. He's trying to make France spend more money on American ordnance. I presume that American companies are the largest arms suppliers on the planet, and so when you wonder why Donald Trump is trying to get his allies while simultaneously insulting them to spend more money on arms, you have to presume that among the extremely dark money that is behind him, a lot of it will come from the traditional sources, you know, which is the military-industrial complex. But NATO, I don't think, says a former American ambassador to Israel, we are fully grappling with the possibility that we could be on the cusp of a completely new era, a fundamental reshaping of the international order. And I don't mean over the course of the Trump administration. I mean by next week. Vladimir Putin orders the murder of British citizens on British soil. Donald Trump sucks up to him. Angela Merkel, meanwhile, has a pipeline running through her country that brings gas in from Russia, and this apparently is evidence of Merkel being in Russia's pocket. And they call it projection, don't they? And I get the self-preservation element of Donald Trump's behaviour. I understand he sees everything transactionally and thinks that business involves one side screwing the other. He doesn't understand compromise. He doesn't understand cooperation. But why would he want to undermine NATO unless it's what Vladimir Putin has told him to do? Ruben is in Canning Town. Ruben, can you help?
Hi, James. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm slightly troubled by the imminent collapse of the international order, but hey, you know, it's nearly the weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame as well. England's out as well, fortunately. But yeah, I think what he's doing in the States, the bigger picture is that he's in the long term continuing to fund the biggest welfare state of America, which is the Defense Department. I mean, their department is almost, I think, just over $600 billion per year that they receive out of the budget. And by him destabilizing NATO, by him coming up as a tough guy, because that's the only way he knows how to speak, you know. Even though he just comes across like a complete donut, he just comes across and he starts saying, you have to up half your budgets and whatever. It's just destabilizing parts of Europe.
See, he's got a point about the GDP defence spending targets, but the way he's insulting and undermining his allies suggests that this is not just about the 2% GDP defence spending targets, which begs the question, what is it about? And I don't think you're suggesting that the answer is he's just a donut, he can't help himself. Or maybe you are, maybe you're right, maybe it's psychosis rather than considered behaviour.
Yeah, but to his crowd back home, he continues to be the glory and saviour in shining light, because he's telling it how it is.
They think he is, even though he's actually doing the precise opposite.
It's like he's for the perfect time. I think this is the kind of person we need right now in the world to start getting our minds clued up again. You know, for example, what he did in North Korea. I know I'm going a bit off sidetracking. He made it seem like, the world. He tweeted that the world is in peace right now.
Yes,
because of the
North Korea's nuclear production has gone up since that meeting.
Exactly. But this is not on the news.
It is on the news, but it's not in the headlines, and it's not on the weird far-right, alt-right websites that just peddle stories designed to enforce Donald Trump's position. But just take me back to Russia, back in the USSR. Is there an explanation for what he's doing that doesn't cast Vladimir Putin in the role of puppet master?
I wouldn't know how to approach that aspect, James. I think he just sees that Putin as the way Putin dictates himself. He likes that kind of personality. He likes.
But can we? Well, I guess what I'm asking is, can we come up with an explanation of why Donald Trump would seek to alienate his allies and undermine international rules-based systems? Because the only person who benefits from this is Vladimir Putin. That's all I've got. But I've opened the programme today by admitting my ignorance and explaining that there's a lot of things I don't understand.
But he thrives in chaos. He thrives in confusion. And when he goes back to the States, he will to his base, which hopefully is starting to diminish. People, the Democrats are just so disappointing right now. They're not standing up to this properly. But when he goes back to his base, it's what
it doesn't matter what's true. They will believe what he tells them, and he will tell them that he's given NATO a right old telling off, and he's gotten Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear program, and he's done this and done that, and none of it's true. But I guess I even take calls from people who think that it is. So this is Dan Shapiro. Thank you, Ruben. Former American ambassador to Israel. I don't think we are fully grappling with the possibility that we could be on the cusp of a completely new era, a fundamental reshaping of the international order, and I don't mean over the course of the Trump administration, I mean by next week. It sounds outlandish to even say it out loud, and some can easily call this hyperbole. I hope to God it does not happen, but it would be insane not to grapple with the possibility. Trump clearly wants to pull the US out of NATO. Is there an explanation for that doesn't involve doing the will of Putin? He doesn't believe in the alliance or any alliances. He thinks our allies take advantage of us. He complains that NATO is worse than NAFTA, whatever that means. And he seeks purely transactional relations with our closest partners. I guess you could just chalk it up as a personality defect on his part rather than necessarily a plot involving Putin. But then you're left with the question of why he never criticises Putin. You know, he was persuaded by the State Department to expel 60 diplomats after the Russians tried to murder Sergei Skripal. We know that, but we also know that the Washington Post reported in April that in retrospect he was really, really cross about that. He felt that he was misled by the State Department because European countries expelled a much smaller number of diplomats. It was explained to him that you count how many the European Union expelled rather than the individual member states, but reportedly he didn't quite grasp that fact. Richard is in Dulverton in Somerset. Richard, what's going on?
Right, okay. We spoke yesterday and I told you were too nice. So
you're famous. You've gone viral.
I know, I saw.
They've changed the name because I said Tiverton.
I'm pills for it, James. I've been to the doctor and got some pills for it.
Right, well done.
It won't be too bad.
Well done. So you are the genius farmer, and now you're going to solve international. You're not really supposed to get on 2 days in a row, but seeing as you were so good yesterday, I'll let you carry on.
Okay. If you go back to 1930s and look at the political climate then, in America there was isolationism. There was a very, very strong, very right-wing view that America shouldn't get involved in European wars, the America first and all the rest of it. And
America first being the thing. And also people forget that people like Anne Frank were refused permission to be refugees in America in the era that you described.
Yeah, absolutely. However, there's what you could describe as a sort of liberal democracy candidates from the Democrats were there going, well, we've got to change the opinion of the American people, we've got to. So they had at least Len to begin with, and then, of course, when the Japanese attacked them, then the American people flipped, and they were then absolutely 100% behind, and we went all the way through the Second World War. At the same time, in the 1930s, you had a bunch of strongmen who sort of strutted and prowled around in a very similar way to what Donald Trump is
Mussolini,
doing today.
Trump, these kind of people.
And Stalin.
Trump, Hitler, Stalin, Trump wasn't
Franco,
around. Yes.
Franco, yeah. There were all these people then. And it's very, very, very similar. And you say to yourself, well, what's the dynamic of this? Well, you come back to 1930s America and you come back to isolationism, and that's what Trump is. But the other thing is...
So you're cutting Putin out of the picture?
No, I'm not. No, I'm coming to Putin.
Go on.
What we've seen with the collapse of communism and the emergence of the oligarchs in the USSR is effectively a mafia state.
Yes.
Putin is simply the big fat spider in a huge web that extends right the way across the entire Russian economy and out into the spheres of influence of Russia. And Putin probably didn't actually authorise the murders that had taken place. They were probably carried out by low-grade intelligence officers. But the reality is that Putin and Trump look at each other in the same way as Franco and Mussolini and Hitler and the rest of them looked at each other, and they like what they see. Yeah. They see a strong man type thing. They see people who want to do deals. They see people who are corrupt, and they recognise what's going on, and they think we can do business with these people. Now, if you take Trump's analysis of NATO is part of what Michael Gove would call the blob. It's the international defence version of the blob. NATO is, as it were, a creature of a previous era. It's hugely expensive, and Americans are being ripped off by them because it's part of that liberal international consensus, which is around values and standards. Now, it's quite interesting. If you look at
rules as well. I mean, by values and standards, they're imposed via rules that everybody has to obey, however strong they are.
So whilst I have to say this to my American friends, we stand with you, you're our oldest allies, and we love you. And whilst I respect the office of the President of the United States, I think the person that's in it at the moment is extremely dangerous and has morals which I simply cannot accept.
But is that an argument? The people make that argument, you should respect the office. What would they have said about people saying you must respect the Chancellorship of Germany in 1938?
Well, yeah, they're the head of state. I mean, they're the head of state. If they're the head of state, then I'm afraid,
it's the same argument.
Bismarck gives him... Yeah, indeed. But as Oestreicher said, when they came to the communists, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a communist. Yeah. When they came to trade unions, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist.
I'm going to correct you for the first time in 2 days. It was Martin Niemöller that said that. Pastor Martin.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. You were schooling me yesterday. We've hit the time for the news, so very, very briefly, what's the most charitable thing you can say about people who can't see what you've just so clearly described, or people who refuse to see it, people who perhaps are getting more exercised about a balloon today than the imminent collapse or the imminent reshaping of the international order?
If we don't learn from history, we're never going to learn.
See, it's 10:30. We're just wondering how troubled we should be by Donald Trump's behaviour towards NATO and indeed his other allies, and whether or not there is an explanation for his apparent determination to alienate them, perhaps to the point of withdrawing from NATO, which is a fear expressed this week by a former American ambassador to Israel. What possible purpose could that serve other than meeting Vladimir Putin's ambitions? The phone lines are open. Thank you for ringing in on this. Sometimes when I come on air with a bit of a tizzy in my head, I wonder whether I'm going to be able to get it out in a way that allows you to understand enough of what I've said to ring in. But so far, so good. 0345 6060 973. John Kerry as well, the former Secretary of State in America, has expressed similar reservations. And I do wonder, although I'm not sure anyone will ring in to answer this particular question. I do wonder what you get in return. You know, when you go, what does the former American ambassador to Israel know about international relations compared to Donald Trump? And what does John Kerry know about the State Department compared to Donald Trump? What does he give people? Because I really would rather not believe that the only thing he's given to those who've been screwed over by big business and billionaires is a different scapegoat. You're allowed to be vile again. You're allowed to blame everything on immigrants or Mexicans. In fact, so powerful is that scapegoating that people are sitting by while one-year-old babies are put in front of judges without their parents being present. People can be cool with that. Yeah, well, shouldn't have. Yeah, no, you cannot ever, whatever the parents have done, justify putting one-year-old babies unaccompanied in front of judges. And if the crime they've committed is to walk across a line drawn in sand by humans, then what have you become? But of course, get cross about the balloon. So what's the analysis that doesn't portray Trump as depraved on every possible level? Answer, I like him because my life's a bit rubbish, or I'm not as rich as I thought I should be. It's by no means a working class support. It's white middle class people vote for Trump in their millions. I think my life, I should have more power. I should have more status. I should have more dominion over more people. Men should be in charge of women's biological reproductive processes. Men should decide whether or not women can have abortions. Men should decide whether or not women can use contraception. Men should decide whether or not women can have equality in the workplace or equal pay or jobs. I mean, women and black people should know their place. I mean, surely he's got an appeal that is not as atavistic as that. Because if he has, I'd love to hear what it is. What is it that allows this man to trash the alliances that have delivered peace to the Western world for the best part of 80 years? He's trashing them while sucking up to the biggest enemy the West has had since the end of the Cold War. And some people are still sort of giving him a free pass. Is there an analysis of this that isn't as bleak as Dan Shapiro's? Perhaps most damaging is that his rhetoric is building up hostility to NATO among his supporters. It's a huge breach in the consensus American support for the alliance that has undergirded Western security for 70 years, and it won't disappear when Trump does. This is skepticism about the international rules-based institutions that protect us from dictators. They protect us from authoritarian despots. Trump looks at authoritarian despots and he gets aroused. I'm sorry to be so bald, but he does. It turns him on when he sees what Kim Jong-un can do to his own people. What's that? You've got critics, and you can just throw them in. You can kill your own family members with anti-aircraft missiles. Wow! Vladimir Putin can lock up journalists. Woo! What? He can have his political rivals killed. God, it turns him on, that. And I guess you have to conclude it also turns on some of his followers. 0345 6060 973. Ronald is in Watford. Ronald, what would you like to say?
Well, I would like to say that it's possibly just his program of nationalism, blunt nationalism, as I would call it. He already said in his inauguration, America first, and he makes it quite crystal clear. He means that. If you think about it, he said Germany would be under control of the Russians just because they have an energy trade deal with Russia, which just makes up 8 to 9% of their energy resources, which is really not putting them into their pocket.
No, you know that, but equally it does give... Oh, am I falling into the trap now of doing what the BBC do and doing false equivalence and trying to be balanced when in fact, really, when you're dealing with someone who would lead the world to the brink of destruction just to satisfy his ludicrous ego, we probably shouldn't be trying to do balance. But he has given... Germany has given Russia the power to flick the switch on 10% of their energy supplies.
Well,
and we know they've done that in the past to other countries that rely on them for...
Well, I do agree with Mr. Trump that Germany should live up to their pledge with the 2%, but that's all I really would agree with him about it, because what he's at the moment doing is he's pressing his allies, like Canada and Germany, into subservience, and that has nothing to do with an alliance or partnership. He is absolutely playing a hegemonial play in Europe, where America is the only one who has to say what the line and the policy is. And if you do that with your allies, what you will possibly reach is right the opposite. I do remember in the 80s when Germany was still split in West Germany and the GDR. And I remember the Easter marches and the big demonstration. And you remember also what the main slogan was? because the NATO was pressing Germany with all these Pershings and rockets. The West German government was pretty much under pressure, and there were huge demonstrations, and in the end there was all these pamphlets with "Amigo Home." It was actually creating a sort of xenophobia, anti-Americanism within Europe, which is actually sad, because usually, and would have hoped that the G7 and the NATO actually would show that if we are working together in free and voluntary cooperation, this is what works. If you try to press other countries under your rigid control as the biggest economical and military power in the West, this is exactly what he has alleged Germany would do now with this.
God, you're right, but that's what, God, you're good. That's what he always does, isn't it? I mean, and that's what they always do, these kind of demagogues, is that they, and their supporters do it as well. You accuse the other side of doing exactly what you do. And then when the other side points out that they have done nothing of the sort, they actually end up inflating the balloon of belief, because even by denying it, you add smoke without there being fire. So you say, no, you're in Germany's pocket. You're in Germany, and you point out, no, of course we're not, and you provide chapter and verse on why you're not. But for the mob, the suggestion is out there, and the criticism of Trump for being in Germany, in Russia's pocket, is diluted because they can just say, yeah, well, so's Germany. And we're back to the goldfish tactic. I don't know if you're familiar with this. They just need a line they can say that stops them from turning into goldfish with their mouths just opening and no words coming out. And the line they've been given is, yeah, but they are too. I know you are, but what am I? And so they now portray Germany as being in hock to Russia, because whenever it's pointed out that Donald Trump must be in hock to Russia, his more bovine support can turn around and say, ah, yes, but so is Germany. That's why they do it, I think. But that makes him clever, and I don't know if he's clever in that way.
No, he's a nationalist, and
that's all they do,
really,
isn't it?
To put it to a conclusion, I really have to say that François Mitterrand, the famous late president of France, he was pretty much right when he said in front of the Strasbourg Parliament, "Le nationalisme, c'est la guerre," and this is where America First will also end up. It actually is pushing more the risk of conflicts, because, as history books show, nationalism...
Where can it go if not to war? I mean, to translate in my schoolboy fashion, Mitterrand was suggesting that nationalism is war.
It ends up in war, it ends up in conflict.
Because where else can it go?
Nations against each other.
Where else can it go? You're whipping up your own people to have deep and negative feelings towards any enemy at all. It doesn't matter who. You can pick any enemy you want. And where does it end? Well, I don't know. I go back to Dan Shapiro. Ronald, what a lovely call. Thank you so much. Dan Shapiro's former American ambassador to Israel. Perhaps most damaging is that his rhetoric is building up hostility to NATO among his supporters. We saw that. It's a huge breach in the consensus American support for the alliance that has undergirded Western security for 70 years, and it won't disappear when Trump does. But he goes further. What's more, his passionate desire for friendship with Putin is emboldening Russia and risks doing further damage to European security. If he recognises Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, also remember shooting passenger planes full of civilians out of the sky, and we're giving that a free pass, but we cross about a balloon. If he seeks to tone down sanctions on Russia over its aggression versus Ukraine, watch out. This could play out in the next 2 weeks. If he sabotages the NATO summit the way he did the G7, don't be surprised if he actually makes a move towards exiting NATO. You think he won't? On what basis? Because his staff can restrain him? Because of his strategic understanding? Oh, please. And that I mean, again, I guess we bring in a slight Brexit reflection here, because when Donald Trump supporters turn around and say they're in favour of sabotaging NATO, they'll be lying. They'll be rewriting history to suit their own position. But look what's happening with Brexit now. You've got people queuing up to say that they've always been in favour of leaving with no deal, when precisely nobody during the referendum was in favour of leaving with no deal. People will rewrite history if they've been led into their position by emotion and feeling rather than reason and fact. And there can't be any reasons and facts involved in falling under Donald Trump's spell. It's all emotion and feeling. And most of those emotions are hate. And most of those feelings are anger. Where we just wonder why Donald Trump is so keen to undermine both NATO, sundry other less formal Western alliances, and the stability of his allies. And I kind of naively hope that we might get an analysis that doesn't involve him just being enslaved to Vladimir Putin's will. And, of course, Theresa May today and tomorrow is tasked with trying to sign up Donald Trump to a programme of sanction and repercussion following Russia's attempt to murder people on British, well, successful attempt actually, albeit that they didn't murder the person they were trying to murder. They murdered a completely innocent British bystander. She now has to try to persuade him to stand up to Russia. Because Brexit has put us in a position where some people believe we have to take whatever crumbs fall from Donald Trump's disgusting table and leave our dignity at the door, because that's what taking back control is. Doing the bidding of a sociopathic man-child. It's incredible, actually, the more you think about it. But anyway, we'll talk about Brexit in the next hour. This hour is all about the President of America and the former ambassador to Israel's insights shared on social media this week. If we get there, this is the prospect of him sabotaging the NATO summit or pulling out at some point. If this happens, the implications are innumerable and terrifying. Russia pouring at Baltics and other Eastern and Central European states, the breakdown of joint defence structures, the withdrawal of US troops from Euro bases, and a less restrained German foreign policy, weaker US power projection to Eurasia. So, and even if you're one of the kind of xenophobes who voted Brexit because you still think the Second World War is being fought, if Germany now does what Donald Trump is telling them to do and gives 2% of its GDP to NATO while spending another 2% of its GDP on domestic defence, they will have the third largest army in the world, third only to America and China. So again, the kind of Brexit drum beaters who think that Donald Trump somehow represents their interests are now cheering the idea of Germany having an army that is by far the biggest in Europe. So well done, guys. Yeah, great. I mean, you're the ones that are terrified of what was the fella earlier this week, the EU-SSR, or the Fourth Reich, or whatever these idiots call it. You're the ones that are terrified of the Fourth Reich, and now you're cheering for a man that wants Germany to build up the biggest army on the planet, except for the American and Chinese ones. Geniuses, all of you. Seriously. 10:52. Adam is in Tottenham. Adam, what's on your mind?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I can't really give you Donald Trump's motives behind...
That's right, I can't give you them either.
And I won't be able to talk to you about them, but what I can talk to you about is being a 20-year-old, being born and raised in London, my perspective on just listening to things like LBC, looking into the world of politics, and I'll be honest with you, I know just as much about politics as any other 20-year-old.
Yes.
Which is very little.
Or very much. You probably know as much as most people who call themselves political experts, as you'll know if you listen to some programmes on LBC.
Sure, precisely. But what I can tell you is I certainly do question the integrity of not just Donald Trump, but many world leaders. I just question whether they have our best interests at heart. They make all of these changes, all of which we barely understand, but we try and talk about anyway. And these changes, therefore, they don't even have any impact in our lives. And when I say our lives, I don't know whether they have an impact in your life, but I see very little in my life. I mean, you just touched on Brexit. What even is Brexit? I still haven't figured it out. And I'm a 20-year-old.
Mate, nor had the Secretary of State for Brexit. Before he resigned, he hadn't figured it out either. Nobody has figured it out. That's why Theresa May said Brexit means Brexit, so that people who aren't as intelligent as you could just go, oh, that's all right then. But you, of course, have an inquiring mind, which is A, why you listen to this programme, and B, why you went, hang on a minute, Brexit means nothing.
And again, I'm questioning whether it's got my best interest at heart.
Brexit? I'm going to have to break it to you gently, Adam. It absolutely doesn't have your best interests at heart, unless you would rather live in a hovel burning furniture in the hope that there'll be a fewer foreign people hanging around outside, in which case Brexit's going to be brilliant for you.
Sure. And all I see is tension. When I look at, as a layman, if I just look at the world, I see the government, the world leaders, they're there to make the world a better place, and they're there to be a support system for the people that live in these countries. So if I didn't have parents, I'd look to the government for my support. You know what I mean? I'd go to them.
And the state, but your Donald Trump supporter and your Brexit ideologue thinks that we have too much government, we have too much state. There's not enough, if you like, concern and care. It should all be led by the markets, and taxes should be lowered, and anyone who can't survive should fall by the wayside. But here's the thing, and I hope you won't feel that I'm patronising you, because I've only recently worked this out myself. I finished my book last night. Anyway, the point is this, that the politicians you describe are deeply flawed, and they kind of admit it. Not always, but even if they don't admit it, they don't challenge the reality that describes their flaws. So, for example, you won't get a Barack Obama lying on national television. So if Barack Obama is caught doing something wrong, he won't actually lie about it. He won't actually say, you know, come to my fake university, buy my fake steaks. You believe me when I say that I routinely give over $100,000 to pornographic actresses who claim to have had an affair with me, even though they haven't had an affair. Do you see what I mean? They don't bend the truth. So what you have, the problem you have, is that you're seeing a false dichotomy. On one side, you've got flawed humans who admit their humanity, and even if they're reluctant to admit their humanity, the media will describe it and they won't deny it. And then on the other side, you've got profoundly depraved individuals who will lie through their teeth when presented with reality, and that allows them to persuade just enough people to put them in power that they're not flawed, that they are going to make America great again. And that, I don't know how you unravel that, mate. I've got to be honest, I'm more than twice your age. And history, as Richard reminded us earlier, history has followed this story. We've heard this song a million times. But when you've got the liar promising to deliver milk and honey, and then the flawed, traditional, liberal politician trying to deliver milk and honey, but admitting, A, that it's really, really difficult and there probably won't be enough to go around anyway, then the more straitened your circumstances are, which is where the financial crisis of 2008 comes in, or the banking crisis in Germany in the 1920s, the more financially squeezed you feel, the more susceptible you become to the scapegoating of the minorities and the revering of the demagogue, however ridiculous the demagogue might be. Because if you think Donald Trump is ridiculous, go and watch The Great Dictator, the Charlie Chaplin film, and look how easy it was to make Adolf Hitler look ridiculous. So, I mean, this isn't really going to cheer you up much, is it, Adam?
No, it's a reality.
I think it is. I mean, I would like nothing more than to be wrong.
It's something we have to accept, but my question is, what's the solution and what's the goal? I mean, where are we trying to go as a world? You know,
the answer to that is really, really boring. The solution to all of the things you're worried about is flawed human politicians who make mistakes, who are held to account, who don't go on national television to describe the reports of their mistakes as lies, who don't call for journalists to be silenced or shot, who don't lock journalists up, who don't put their faith in InfoWars, which contends that the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax and that the children murdered were actors and that their grieving parents are all fakers. That's the President of America's favoured news source. And there are people listening to this programme and this radio station and the BBC and reading the newspapers who are on that side of history at the moment. And you can only get them back to the other side by having these calm and complicated conversations about reality. You'll never get all of them back because some of them love the hatred and the anger. That's all they've got. But for most people, it is just a case of recognising that boring, flawed human beings who mean well are probably going to be a better bet than mad, entirely sociopathic narcissists who are interested only in their own ego and status. Here endeth the lesson.
And James, that's exactly what I see. Sometimes I'll leave it with this, James. Sometimes I just look at, you know, when I look at someone like Donald Trump, I just think, how did this person even come into power? Like, what has the world come to for someone like this to be voted into power? It just doesn't make sense to me. We have so many smart people. I've met smarter people than Donald Trump myself.
Well,
and
yeah, I mean, at the bus stop.
And James, what really gets me is that someone like me couldn't go and become the Prime Minister of England. And I wish I could. Because I wish somebody that had the same, you know, moral compass as me could stand before the country and be a person, you know, that this country actually looks up to. I was there that night at Grenfell Tower. I was there. I saw that building burning right in front of my eyes, and I was only there by chance.
Sure.
I was in the area.
Why do you feel you can't? I don't want to. Again, I've already patronised you enough. How can you be sure that you? I mean, why can't you get politically involved?
I can't get politically involved because every single person that I see that stands on that podium and that holds that title has all had the same education and been through the same path in life, and that's not the path that I went down.
I hear you. Fair enough, but you're only 20. It's not like the game's over, and you know who the MP for Tottenham is. David Lammy's a pretty inspirational figure.
Sure. I totally understand, James.
But the answer to your question, oddly, is going to depress you even further, because the people that like Donald Trump think that the people who aren't like them have far too much status and power already. I mean, that's why they hate Barack Obama so much. How dare a man of colour end up president of America? I've been standing in line waiting for my status to be reaffirmed, and it's not being reaffirmed because they're all obsessing about transgender toilets and people of colour and blinking women and feminists. When is my time going to come? Say the most privileged people on the planet, the straight white males. But because they're not as privileged as they were in previous generations, they can't stop throwing their toys out of the pram. And their patron saint is currently resplendent above London, 6 metres high, bright orange, and wearing a nappy that's probably full. I stepped out of the studio during the news bulletin. What did I miss? A couple of tweets coming in. The leader of Westminster Council really does need to go back to primary school and start learning all over again. I assume that the leader, that's from Andy, Sceptical Brit writes, I assume that the leader of Westminster Council is endorsing parody balloons for all leaders of countries with awful leaders. What did she say? She didn't go down that ludicrous route of saying you can't protest about Donald Trump unless you also protested about Robert Mugabe. Can you? Not the leader of Westminster Council, surely not. I mean, I appreciate why journalists do it, because they've got to throw red meat to the mob. But I mean, that is the... Well, we'll find out. I'll find you the clip in a minute. I'm carrying on this conversation a little bit about Donald Trump, because I think we need to pay attention. And I do understand the kind of tabloid sensibilities that would encourage you to think that a balloon is more important than a former American ambassador to Israel warning that we could be on the cusp of a fundamental reshaping of the international order. But, you know, I can't help the way that I'm made. This is Daniel Shapiro continuing, after pointing out the in his words, innumerable and terrifying implications of Trump pulling out of NATO. And he goes on, that just scratches the surface. We honestly cannot begin to imagine living in a new era without these international organising structures. Because for all of NATO's challenges, no sane person or American political leader has or would contemplate such a reckless move. But it could happen. Our president doesn't know the history or strategy, doesn't listen to experts, personalises everything and makes it transactional, and loves the drama of the outrageous move that dominates cable TV coverage. For him, pulling out of NATO is all gain, no cost. And then he sounds a little bit like I have for the last 2 years. Even as I write this, it sounds fantastical. I will be the happiest person on the planet if I look back at this, Fred, and say, man, you were way overreacting. But we need to be ready for this awful scenario to play out. We are potentially on the verge of a wildly dangerous cascade of events that will devastate our interests, weaken our leadership, abandon our allies, embolden our adversaries, and make the world a darker and more brutal place. And still people will cheer and go, yay, good, darker and more brutal. Because, and another lesson that history has taught us, they don't think the darkness and the brutality will touch them. You see, it will all be directed at that lot over there, the Jews or the Muslims, the blacks or the gays, the intellectuals or the journalists, the homosexuals, whoever it may be. There'll be brutality and darkness, but it won't touch me, so I'm cool with it. And as I've said quite a few times recently, it's been a crash course for me lately, realising how many people fall into that category. And I would cautiously suggest that a lot of them today will be a lot more angry about a bright orange balloon than they will about babies being put on trial without their parents in American courtrooms. And that is a point at which I can no longer understand or keep up with what's happened to our society and our values. I just can't anymore. 0345 6060 973. Josh is in Islington. Josh, what's going on?
Hi there.
Hello.
I just wanted to, well, first of all, let's start with commenting about the balloon. So,
We're not really talking about the balloon today.
Oh.
Because there are more, but I know I keep referring to it in kind of glib
I know
comparisons, but I can't. I mean, of course you can. I can't mention it without letting you mention it. Go on, be quick.
Yeah, sure. I think Trump's going to spin this around in his favour. Putting a balloon above him, I don't really care either way. You've got the right to protest, but it seems a little bit ludicrous, really. Because,
I worry it distracts. I mean, I have quite a childish sense of humour, so I quite like it. But I think I worry that it distracts from the seriousness of the stuff we should be talking about, and it gives the kind of cheerleaders, the apologists for the child catcher in chief, an excuse not to talk about the whether it is the putting 1-year-olds in courtrooms without their parents, whether it is taking babies from their mothers and locking them in cages, whether it is the fact that North Korea has increased its nuclear production since that so-called summit. It gives all of the apologists and cheerleaders an excuse not to talk about the depravity. They can talk instead about the balloon. So yeah, I wouldn't call myself a cheerleader for it, but anyway, on to the bigger issues.
Yeah, good, on to the bigger issues. So concerning the, well, I think your comment was, is Putin like the puppet master of Donald Trump's actions when it comes to this damage that his policies might be doing to NATO, or the way his intentions anyway? In my opinion, I think saying Putin might be puppet mastering this, or he's got a heavy amount of involvement, is a little bit ridiculous, because it seems to me like the driving force behind this is going to be the military-industrial complex of America. So if NATO does fall apart, if everybody becomes reliant on America for military support...
Hang on, no, they already are reliant upon America.
Well, they already are.
But that's what NATO does, and that's what he's complaining about.
Yes, but even further, instead of just, like you've said, well, yeah, they would become more reliant on less reliant on America, because of the lack of contributions they're required to build their armies up, like you were saying with Germany. If they are buying American arms, if they are buying...
and then you need to explain why he never criticises Putin, then. Well, he criticises Justin Trudeau, he criticises Theresa May, he criticises Emmanuel Macron, he criticises Kim Jong-un, even, before cozying up to him and feeling profound envy at the real totalitarianism that Trump can currently only dream of. Why does he never criticise Putin?
It's a good point, but the one thing we've got to bear in mind when it comes with Russia is the amount of tension involved on the international stage, and Putin's quite a decisive actor, as well as Trump himself.
Yes, but the British government have established that his agents were responsible for the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, and it looks as if, as a result of that operation, they were responsible for the murder of that poor woman in Amesbury. And as a result of that, our allies expelled diplomats, they expelled spies. America's State Department expelled 60. So you could easily criticise Vladimir Putin. You're not hidebound by anything that could be described as diplomacy. There has to be a reason why Donald Trump never really says anything in public that would upset Vladimir Putin, while he's not just comfortable but positively I think unable not to publicly criticise almost everybody else. Why would that be?
Well, at the moment, this is all just conjecture, really.
No, it's not. It's not. He's criticised all of the people I just listed, and he's never said anything bad about Putin. Why would that be?
Perhaps because he wants to, regardless of these terrible things that Russia has done, he's trying to build a slightly closer relationship with them.
Regardless of these... No, but I mean, crikey, that's an even bleaker answer than you realise. Regardless of these terrible things he has done, shooting civilians out of the sky, invading sovereign territories, annexing Crimea, killing British people on British soil. Yeah, but despite all that... And
from an American perspective, it's to avoid something like another Cold War. The last thing we need is a standoff between two hegemonic nuclear powers.
Well, that's exactly where we're heading to.
And surely poking
Except China will be the hegemonic nuclear power.
At the moment,
because he won't upset Putin. I mean, we can go around in circles all day, but until you can offer up an explanation of why he won't upset Putin, but he will upset everybody else, there's going to be no filling in your sandwich. Alex is in Crouch End. Alex, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello, Alex.
I think it's kind of... I think we have to look at this situation as Trump is trying to appease two groups of people. One's his voter base, and the other is the super wealthy elite.
That's another Brexit parallel, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, it is. And I mean, it's if you look at his legislation and everything that he's scrapped, you can almost go one for one. One's to appease the...
This is for the billionaires. This is for the plebs. This is a real and substantive proposition. I mean, here's some hate-filled rhetoric that'll keep them chomping and happy.
Absolutely. So you've got, like, for example, repeal a rule allowing transgender people to serve in the military, voter base. You've got reversed...
didn't cost anything. That didn't cost anything. Victimises scapegoats, and it failed as well. But I think the story was halfway around the world before the truth had got its boots on, wasn't it? So the transgender example is perfect.
Exactly, and I mean, ban on drilling for oil in the Arctic lifted, the Muslim ban, that's going to be the voters.
For the base,
fracking
doesn't cost
regulations,
anything, hurts the minority. Fracking and oil costs money, but it all makes its way to his billionaire backers.
Absolutely. So the question is with the whole NATO thing is I think we have to think about which side this is falling on.
Yes.
Because I don't think he does anything without there being some kind of double kind of meaning to it. It's not,
Well, I would use it. I would describe it as the dichotomy of mob and money. This is for the mob, this is for the money. Here's a policy for the mob. We're going to be nasty about trans people in the army. We're going to be, what was the other one you came up with a minute ago? We've got, here's the Muslim ban. Utterly meaningless, but it doesn't cost anything and it keeps the mad people happy. This is for the mob, this is for the mob, this is for the mob. Drilling in Alaska, sticking tariffs on things that are actually going to hurt workers but might help investors. That's for the money. So everything he does is either for the mob, in which case it will be pretty nasty and mostly rhetorical and demagogish, or for the money, in which case it will be legislative-based and meaningful. The only difference comes in on the social justice stuff, like abortion, that's for the mob, right? But the billionaires are also sometimes quite comfortable with these restrictive policies.
Well, yeah, because, yes, but that's sort of a personal kind of very traditional conservative view.
So where's Putin? Where's Putin then?
Putin, I still kind of think it's totally possible that Putin has compromise on Trump, if I'm honest.
I think it's more possible now than it was when the story was first mooted, isn't it? Because the longer it goes on, this absolute and abject refusal to do anything that might upset Vladimir Putin, while Vladimir Putin rides roughshod over the international law, you have to presume that there's a tape somewhere or a file.
I mean, it looks more and more likely, to be honest, just given, exactly like you say, there's just a complete kind of, he's just not really accepting that anything Putin does is of importance in any way. And it is kind of, this is kind of going along with such a, destruction of global kind of connections between countries.
And what's the plus then now? Because, I mean, obviously all the people that we've been describing are going to be furious at having a mirror held up to them. But if they had the guts to ring in, what would they say? What would they say they get in return? So, yeah, all right, Trump is letting Vladimir Putin tear up international law. He's completely screwing over ordinary people to reward his billionaire mates. Yeah, all right, now I realise that I'm a bit of a mug because I thought the Muslim ban was actually important and I didn't realise that it doesn't apply to any countries where Donald Trump has actually built hotels, even if terrorists have actually come from those countries. So what do they get? I mean, what's the payoff? What's the reward?
Subservience, I'd say.
Is it that doff cap tug forelock deference?
Well, I think it is, because I think there are a lot of people in the world who never really get taught to think critically about anything. So they are willing to go along with what people say, the status quo.
And you give them a fig leaf to repeat. It prevents them from having to think about things. And a big man comes along and says, I will look after you and I will fight that enemy that I've just told you about. You didn't even know it existed before. And there's something inside some of us, but possibly inside all of us. It's just buried deeper below the surface of people like you and me than it is others, and somehow it appeals, especially if you're feeling a bit squeezed. You've come off the back of the financial crisis, you're a little bit uncomfortable about all these minorities who are suddenly demanding that they get treated equally to you, and you just sort of think, here's a man that is going to restore the old order, he's going to make America great again, he's going to, if he plays his cards right, we might be allowed to have slaves again by the end of his presidency.
That's it. There's definitely that kind of traditional kind of Christian way of looking at things.
Evangelical Christian, not being anything remotely resembling anything Jesus ever said. I wonder, we've got the Brexit, the white paper isn't going to be published until Dominic Raab gives his speech in the House of Commons. I've got a kind of sneak preview of it. We'll catch up with Theo about what we think is going to be in it. But I would love to know... I'd love to know if there is an answer to the question of why Donald Trump won't do anything critical or damaging to Vladimir Putin. NATO is now sitting in emergency session to discuss the aftermath of whatever it is Donald Trump has told them, it seems increasingly likely that that he has threatened to pull out, which is precisely what the former American ambassador to Israel warned would happen. He provides a relatively apocalyptic account of what the consequences would be. And yet, still, some people will be unperturbed by this. We have done no planning for this course of action. This is leaving NATO, and this is talking about America. No one thinks it is a good idea. But one man whose knowledge and values are wanting, whose motivation is suspect, and whose supporters follow him blindly, could take us there. I'm hearing that Trump himself is about to give some sort of emergency press conference, which we would. Does that mean he's landed? And anyway, he hasn't taken off yet, so we will find out what he has to say. In fact, we'll cross to it live because, you know, this is potentially the beginning of the fundamental reshaping of the international order. And when historians of the future look back and ask, well, why did so many people go away with it? Why did so many people sit back as Donald Trump essentially defecated all over Western peace and stability? And the answer will be, well, because there was a balloon. Here he is. Here is the president.
2-1 to Croatia.
No, that is not him, evidently. We'll come back in a second.
This is LBC.
You must have something I can use.
I'm afraid not, madam. Our entire fleet of private jets has been booked out. We did have 13 planes available, but now all gone.
How on earth am I supposed to get to Saint-Tropez this weekend?
Nicer problems to have. This Friday the 13th, Euromillions is making 13 lucky guarantees. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
My apologies for crashing the adverts. I do want to hear this. Here's a news conference with Donald Trump in Brussels.
Meeting, it was going down. The amount of money being spent by countries was going down and down very substantially, and commitments were made. Only 5 of 29 countries were making their commitment, and that's now changed. The commitment was at 2%. Ultimately, that'll be going up quite a bit higher than that. So we made a tremendous amount of progress today. It's been about, at a minimum, they estimate, and they're going to be giving you exact numbers, but since last year, they've raised an additional $33 billion. That's been put up by the various countries, not including the United States. And the United States commitment to NATO is very strong, remains very strong, but primarily because everyone, the spirit they have, the amount of money they're willing to spend, the additional money that they will be putting up has been really, really amazing to see it. To see the level of spirit in that room is incredible. And I hope that we're going to be able to get along with Russia. I think that we probably will be able to. The people in the room think so, but they really stepped up their commitment and stepped it up like they never have before. So we took in an additional 33. The number could actually be higher than 40 when they give you the final number. The Secretary General Stoltenberg will be giving those numbers sometime today, probably in his concluding press statement. But we are doing numbers like they've never done before or ever seen before. And you'll be seeing that, and I guess you'll be hearing that a little bit later. Okay, we have our Secretary of State, as you know, and we have John is here. So if you have any questions for the three of us, Mike Pompeo just got back from a 3rd trip, as you know, to North Korea. He's become a true expert on the trips to North Korea, the best way to get there, the best way to get out. And he gets along very well, and he's doing a great job over there. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Can you tell us whether or not you warned people that the U.S. would pull out of NATO if they weren't meeting their spending goals?
I told people that I'd be very unhappy if they didn't up their commitments very substantially, because the United States has been paying a tremendous amount, probably 90% of the cost of NATO. And now people are going to start, and countries are going to start upping their commitments. So I let them know yesterday, actually. I was surprised that you didn't pick it up. It took till today. But yesterday, I let them know that I was extremely unhappy with what was happening. And they have substantially upped their commitment, yeah. And now we're very happy and have a very, very powerful, very, very strong NATO, much stronger than it was 2 days ago. Yes, ma'am. Yes, hi.
Much stronger than it was 2 days ago.
Famous on television.
Carry on. More from Donald Trump at his press conference in Brussels.
Did you ever at any point say that the U.S., though, might stop engaging with NATO? And do you think that you're...
So the journalists are pressing the President of America on whether he did make a meaningful threat to pull out of NATO, which is something we've been discussing all morning. Very much like the North Korea summit so far. Lots of claims, no details, no facts.
The United States was not being treated fairly, but now we are, because the commitment has been up so much. So now they are. And I was very firm yesterday. You have to understand, I know a lot of the people in the room. I was here last year. I let them know last year in a less firm manner, but pretty firm, and they raised an additional $33 billion. I think going to $40 billion, but it's $33 billion as of today. And then today and yesterday, I was probably a little bit more firm. But I believe in NATO. I think NATO is very important, probably the greatest ever done. But the United States was paying for anywhere from 70 to 90% of it, depending on the way you calculate. That's not fair to the United States. In addition to that, as you know, we're in negotiations with the EU, and we're going to be meeting with them next week. We've been treated very unfairly on trade. Our farmers have been shut out of the European Union. Now, you could say they're different, but basically, to a large extent, they're the same countries. So I think we're going to be ultimately treated fairly on trade. We'll see what happens. But I can tell you that NATO now is really a fine-tuned machine. People are paying money that they never paid before. They're happy to do it. And the United States is being treated much more fairly. Yes, sir.
NewsHour. Did you win any concessions in your meeting and discussions with the German Chancellor when it comes to German defense spending and also this issue of purchasing energy from Russia? And secondly, what would you say to your critics that say by creating this scene here at NATO, you're only enabling President Putin in Russia to further disturb things in Ukraine and Georgia?
Well, if you consider putting up tremendously the additional funds at a level that nobody's ever seen before, I don't think that's helping Russia. I think that NATO is much stronger now than it was 2 days ago. I think that NATO was not doing what they were supposed to be doing, a lot of the countries, and we were doing much more than we should have been doing. Frankly, we were carrying too much of a burden. That's why we call it burden sharing. I was using the term a lot today, burden sharing. We had a fantastic meeting at the end. 29 countries, and they are putting up a lot. Germany has increased very substantially their time period, and Germany's coming along, and we still have to figure out what's going on with the pipeline, because the pipeline is coming in from Russia, so we're going to have to figure that out. I brought it up. Nobody brought it up but me, and we all are talking about it now, and actually I think the world is talking about it now, maybe more than anything else, but we're going to figure that out. And frankly, maybe everybody's going to have a good relationship with Russia, so there'll be a lot less problem with the pipeline. But to me, that was a very major point of contention. We discussed it at length today. Germany has agreed to do a lot better than they were doing, and we're very happy with that. We had a very good relationship with Angela Merkel. Yes.
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Margaret Talla from Bloomberg.
Yes. After all these years, I know, Margaret. Go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe I'm being dense here, but could you just clarify, are you still threatening to potentially pull the United States out of NATO for any reason? And do you believe you can do that without Congress's explicit support and approval?
I think I probably can, but that's unnecessary. And the people have stepped up today like they've never stepped up before. And remember the word, $33 billion more they're paying. You'll hear that from the Secretary General in a little while. He thanked me, actually. He actually thanked me. And everybody in the room thanked me. There's a great collegial spirit in that room that I don't think they've had in many years. They're very strong. So, yeah, very, very unified, very strong, no problem, right?
We're in NATO. No, okay.
No problem.
Mr. President, Jonathan Lemire with the Associated Press.
Sure.
You have said previously you wanted the countries to step up their spending to 2%. Yesterday, there was a suggestion it might be 4% or perhaps 2% at a much quicker timetable. Yeah. Can you clarify, what did they commit to doing? Yeah. Is that satisfactory to you?
So what they're doing is spending at a much faster clip. They're going up to the 2% level. Now, you have to understand, some of them have parliaments, they have their own congresses, they have a lot of things they have to go to. So, you know, they're here as a prime minister, as a president, and they can't necessarily go in and say, this is what we're going to do, but they're going back for approvals. Some are at 2%. Others have agreed definitely to go to 2%. And some are going back to get the approval, and which they will get, to go to 2%. After we're at 2%, we'll start talking about going higher. But I said, ultimately, we should be, in years in advance, we should be at 4%. I think 4% is the right number. Now, the United States, depending on the way you calculate it, was at 4.2%. And I said, that's unfair. And we have the largest GDP by far, especially since we've increased it by so much since a thing called the election. Our GDP has gone way up. And so the fact that our GDP went way up, that means we're paying for even more, which is very unfair. So I explained that. We will go to much higher than 2% into the future, but right now we're getting people up to 2%, and that'll take place over a fairly short period of time, a short number of years. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, that pledge there to raise spending to 2% of GDP had already been secured by Barack Obama and was being delivered over a number of years. So just like with Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump is taking the status quo, claiming it as his own, and sending the news back to America that he's done something remarkable, where in fact precisely nothing has changed. This is all on the record, it's all published, but you won't hear it on Fox News.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Jeremy Diamond with CNN. How are you? Quick question with regards to Germany and the comments that you made yesterday. Do you feel like, given the threats that you made about potentially leaving NATO, about insulting Germany's sovereignty, it appears, by suggesting they are totally controlled by Russia, do you feel like that's an effective way to conduct diplomacy? And secondly, would you be able to be a little bit more specific about the commitments that you secured today with regards to increasing financial commitment? Is there an updated timeline? Are there specific countries you could cite? Because a majority of them are already planning.
Jeremy Diamond off CNN, just repeating what I just told you and pressing the president for details.
In fact, Germany was going to be in the year 2028 or 30. Yeah, I think it's a very effective way to deal, but I didn't deal exactly the way you said. I have great respect for Germany. My father's from Germany. Both of my parents are from the EU, despite the fact they don't treat us well on trade, but I think that'll change also. And I think we'll see that, because on the 25th of July, they're coming in to start negotiations with me. We'll see. And if they don't negotiate in good faith, we'll do something having to do with all of the millions of cars that are coming into our country and being taxed at a virtually zero level, at a very low level. But, Jeremy, I think it's been a very effective way of negotiating, but I'm not negotiating. I just want fairness for the United States. We're paying for far too much of NATO. NATO is very important, but NATO is helping Europe more than it's helping us. At the same time, it's very good for us. So we have now got it to a point where people are paying a lot more money, and that's starting really last year. It really had, as you were there last year. And last year we had a big impact. Again, we took in $33 billion more. And if you ask Secretary General Stoltenberg, he gives us total credit, meaning me, I guess, in this case, total credit, because I said it was unfair.
Total credit for an agreement negotiated by Barack Obama and John Kerry, that apparently being given to Donald Trump by the Secretary General of the UN. It'd be interesting to see what he says later.
Said, okay, hey, do the best you can, and they left. Nobody did anything about it. And it got to a point where the United States was paying for 90% of NATO. And that's not fair.
Back up to 90%. It was 70% a couple of minutes ago. It's important to keep an eye on these things.
In terms of getting along, I know most of the people in the room because of last year, because of the year and a half that we've been in office, year and a half plus, but we have a great relationship. Everybody in that room, by the time we left, got along, and they agreed to pay more, and they agreed to pay it more quickly.
They had already agreed that.
Hey, Mr. President, Philip Rucker from the Washington Post. You tweeted yesterday, what good is NATO? And you've talked about NATO as an alliance that benefits Europe, that defends and protects Europe. Do you see any value of NATO to the United States vis-a-vis Russia? Does it help protect the United States from Russia, in your view?
I think it's another very strong ally, as together it's much stronger than, obviously, individual countries. I think it's the way we have it now. I think it's I think NATO got You know what was happening with spending prior to my getting into office. The numbers were going down. Now the numbers have gone up like a rocket ship. The numbers have gone up a lot, and they've gone up rapidly, and they're now going up further. So I think NATO is...
I can't tell you what the numbers are, of course, but they've gone up like a rocket ship.
And really know, and he's a friend of mine. But Secretary General Stoltenberg has done a fantastic job and putting it all together. And we were the ones that really... we gave him an extension of his contract, as you know. I think he's done a really good job. I think that when I was saying that, I am very concerned with the pipeline. I don't like the pipeline. And when I talk about NATO, I say, how do you have NATO? And then you have somebody paying the people that you're protecting against. But maybe we'll get along with the group that we're protecting against. I think that's a real possibility. As you know, I'm meeting with President Putin on Monday.
That's the 6th or 7th time he's mooted the possibility of getting along with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, of course, responsible for the annexation of Crimea, the shooting down of a passenger jet, Malaysian Airlines and passenger jet, and the attempted murder of British citizens on British soil. That's the guy he wants to get along with.
Ukraine was here today, by the way, and, you know, it's very interesting to hear what they had to say. So, excuse me? Well, he may. I mean, look, he may. You know, what am I going to do? If he may deny it. I mean, it's one of those things. So all I can do is say, did you, and don't do it again. But he may deny. I mean, well, you'll be the first to know. Okay? Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
President Robert Wall with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
If the Germans and the Canadians and others don't come up to 2%, what is your fallback position? How will you up the pressure to make them actually...
Well, they will. They will. I have no doubt about it. They all made commitments, and they will be up to 2%.
Kim Jong-un in North Korea, of course, has increased his nuclear production since pledging to reduce it under Donald Trump's last international adventure.
TV Palestine News. Mr. President, what do you think today needs or not Georgia most support from NATO? And I want to ask about...
Georgia? They were here today represented.
Yes, and will you talk about Georgia in a meeting with with President Putin?
Well, they were here. They made a very favorable impression, and we listened to their plight. It's a tough situation with Georgia, but they made a very favorable impression in the room, okay?
He has absolutely no idea what that question was about.
Yeah, you really did. Come on, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I had a question as well, but nonetheless, I'll ask her. Will you recognize?
Go ahead.
Will you recognize Russia's Will you recognize Crimea as part of Russia when you meet President?
That's an interesting question because, you know, long before I got here, President Obama allowed that to happen. That was on his watch, not on my watch. You know, people like to say, oh, Crimea. But
Donald Trump suggesting there that Barack Obama should have invaded Russia.
Crimea. They just opened a big bridge that was started years ago. They built, I think, a submarine port, substantially added billions of dollars. So that was on Barack Obama's watch. That was not on Trump's watch. Would I have allowed it to happen? No, I would not have allowed it to happen. But he did allow it to happen. So that was his determination. What will happen with Crimea from this point on, that I can't tell you. But I'm not happy about Crimea. But again, that was Barack Obama's watch, not Trump's watch. Yeah, go ahead, sure.
Donald Trump there saying he can't tell you what Donald Trump's attitude to Crimea will be in the future.
Your summit with President Putin, will you be raising arms control issues? Would you like to extend New START? And will you raise concerns about violations of the INF Treaty?
Yes.
And as a follow-up to the NATO meeting today, will you suggest to him or would you consider stopping military exercises in the Baltic states if that's something that he requests?
Well, perhaps we'll talk about that. But I will say that we are going to be talking about those three issues and many more. We'll be talking about it, Jeff. Okay? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Ivo Caizzi, Corriere della Sera. We are in the NATO headquarters that costed almost the double as planned before. I would like to know if you are planning to guarantee the taxpayers that the new money that is flowing into NATO will be spent in the best possible way, especially the money coming from countries that have several problems with the public finances.
Well, the money will be spent properly, and one of the things that we have many wealthy countries with us today, but we have some that aren't so wealthy, and they did ask me if they could buy the military equipment, and could I help them out, and we will help them out a little bit. We're not going to finance
there it is. There it is, the sales via American weapons companies.
Because The United States makes by far the best military equipment in the world, the best jets, the best missiles, the best
Here comes the
guns,
sales pitch.
the best everything. We make by far. I mean, that's one thing. I guess I assumed it prior to taking office, but I really learned since being president, our equipment is so much better than anybody else's equipment. When you look at our companies, Lockheed and Boeing.
Here it is, not even pretending.
Material, the equipment that we make is so far superior. Everybody wants to buy our equipment. In fact, it's a question, can they make it? Because they are doing very well. Can they make it for so many people? So we are helping some of those countries get online and buy the best equipment.
This is gibberish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kristen Brown with Fox News. On your upcoming summit with President Putin, did any of your allies here express any specific concerns or talk to you about any messages that they'd like you to take with you when you go to this summit?
Yeah, just the opposite of concern. They actually, and they'll probably come out with a little bit of an edict, but they actually thanked me for meeting with President Putin. I look forward to the meeting. They thanked me. They thought it was a great thing that I was doing it, and they gave us our best wishes, or their best wishes. Now, with that being said, we'll see what happens. Just a loose meeting. It's not going to be big schedule. I don't think it should take a very long period of time, and we'll see where it leads. But it could lead to something very productive, and maybe it's not. But I think meeting with people is great. We had a great meeting with Chairman Kim, and I'll tell you, Mike Pompeo did a fantastic job. I might ask you to say a few words, Mike, while you're here. Just 1 second. Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I don't know enough about Mike Pompeo to do a more live fact-checking, but let's hear the opening comment.
With a couple of stops here to Brussels, we had a productive conversation. There remains a great deal of work to do, but I think most importantly, my counterpart Kim Jong-chol made...
Pompeo, they're directly contradicting Donald Trump, who claims that the work has all been done. Mike Pompeo now saying there's still an awful lot of work to do. Donald Trump standing behind him appears to be sort of whistling.
I think just to finish on that, it's so important.
Oh, he's back.
That was an amazing, really an amazing meeting, I thought. And I really think that we established very good relationships. We'll see where it all lands, but there have been no missile tests. There have been no research.
He's already told us where it all ends.
They have
but
blown
of
up
course,
a site.
they are now producing more nuclear material than they were before the meeting.
Taken down all of the propaganda. In fact, somebody said there's no more music playing at the borderline. You know, the music was going on for many years. They said recently that, wow, there's no more of the heavy music and the propaganda. They've
back to gibberish.
They've done a lot of things, and we got back our 3 hostages. So it's a good process. But the main thing is there have been no rocket launches. There have been no missile tests. There's been no nuclear tests, no explosions, no nothing for almost 9 months. Okay.
Donald Trump, they're celebrating the fact that there haven't been any nuclear explosions in Korea for the last 9 months.
There are lots of protests planned in London and elsewhere. How do you feel about that?
I think it's fine. I mean, I think they like me a lot in the UK. I think they agree with me on immigration. I'm very strong on immigration. I made a point today. I said, you've got to stop. You're ruining you're going to have a lot of problems. You see what's going on throughout the world with immigration. I probably at least partially won an election because of immigration. If you look at Italy, Giuseppe, who I got to know quite well.
There it is again. Well, what is it people like about you, Donald Trump? Immigration.
Policies on Italy. I think that a lot of the people in the UK, I think that's why Brexit happened. Now, I don't know what's going on with the negotiation. Who knows? And I guess that's become a very interesting point of contention. I said I'm going to a few hot spots. We have NATO, then we have the UK, and then we have Putin. And I said, Putin may be the easiest of them all. You never know. But I'm going to a pretty hot spot right now, right, with a lot of resignations. But I will say that immigration is a very important thing. And I told them today the EU, the European Union, better be very careful because immigration is taking over Europe, and they better be very, very careful. And I said that loud and clear. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
President Trump, Radu Tudor, Antena 3 Romania. What will you tell President Putin about this summit and about NATO?
Well, I think he's going to see about this summit. This has turned out to be a very successful summit. This is, I think really that NATO is more put together right now, is more coordinated, and I think there's a better spirit for NATO right now than perhaps they've ever had. It's richer than it ever was. The commitments are made at a higher level than they've ever been made, and the money to be paid out faster, far faster.
This is demonstrably untrue.
Range, a goal. It wasn't something that they were committed to. Now it's a commitment. There's a big difference, the 2% number. And that's why so many people weren't reaching it or hitting it. It was just sort of like this amorphous number out there. Now it's a commitment, a real commitment. I think he's going to see that there's great unity, great spirit, great esprit de corps, and I think we're going to have a good meeting. Regardless of that, I think we're going to have a good meeting. But this was a fantastic 2 days. This was a really fantastic, it all came together at the end. And yes, it was a little tough for a little while, but ultimately, you can ask anybody at that meeting, they're really liking what happened over the last 2 days. There's a great, great spirit leaving that room. Yes, sir, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jonathan Beale from BBC. I just wonder, you think you're going to get along with President Putin at that meeting? Could you just tell us, why do you think that? Is there something you admire about him? And the second question, because you're just about to go to the UK.
Well, he's a competitor. He's been very nice to me the times I've met him. I've been nice to him. He's a competitor.
So all American intelligence agencies believe that Vladimir Putin interfered in the last American election. Donald Trump, press conference underway, yet to issue a single syllable of criticism of the Russian president.
I hope we get along well. I think we get along well. But ultimately, he's a competitor. He's representing Russia. I'm representing the United States. So, in a sense, we're competitors. Not a question of friend or enemy. He's not my enemy. And hopefully someday, maybe he'll be a friend. It could happen. But I just don't know him very well. I've met him a couple of times, and when I did meet him, most of you people were there. Yes.
And Brexit, sorry, sir, because you are going to the UK. What will be your message on Brexit?
Well, Brexit is, I've been reading a lot about Brexit over the last couple of days, and it seems to be turning a little bit differently.
He hasn't been reading.
They're getting at least partially involved back with the European Union. I have no message. It's not for me to say. I own a lot of property there. I'm going to Scotland while I wait for the meeting. I have Turnberry in Scotland, which is a magical place, one of my favorite places.
Advertising his private businesses now.
While I wait for the Monday meeting. But it's not for me to say what they should be doing in the UK. I have great friendships. My mother was born in Scotland. I have great friendships over there.
This is Donald Trump, who previously described himself as Mr. Brexit, now explaining why he has no view at all on Brexit.
I'd like to see him be able to work it out so it could go quickly, whatever they work out. Is it heartbreaking? Oh, hard Brexit, I see.
Nothing about Iraq.
I thought you said it was heartbreaking.
About Iraqi issue.
I said that might be going a little bit too far, right? Heartbreaking. Is it heartbreaking? A lot of things are heartbreaking. No, I would say that, Brexit is Brexit. It's not like, I guess when you use the term hard Brexit, I assume that's what you mean. The people voted to break it up. So I would imagine that's what they'll do, but maybe they're taking a little bit of a different route. So I don't know if that's what they voted for. I just want the people to be happy. They're great people. And I do think sure there'll be protests, because there are always protests, but I think there were protests the night of the election both ways. But in the end...
Mr. Brexit, they're explaining that he has no idea what people voted for when they voted for Brexit.
And one state that, is interesting, one of the states we won, Wisconsin. I didn't even realize this until fairly recently. That was the one state that Ronald Reagan didn't win when he ran the board. His second time, he didn't win Wisconsin, and we won Wisconsin. So we had a great night. Protests, there might be protests, but I believe that the people in the UK, Scotland, Ireland, as you know, I have property in Ireland, I have property all over. I think that those people they like me a lot. And they agree with me on immigration. And I think that's why you have Brexit in the first place, because of immigration. Yes, ma'am.
Greta Karvala from Finland. What would be the best deal with Putin when you come to Helsinki? And don't you think that your harsh diplomacy, that you are playing in the same goal that Putin, with your harsh diplomacy towards EU and NATO?
I can't tell you what would be the ultimate. What would be the ultimate? Well, let's see. No more nuclear weapons anywhere in the world would be the ultimate, okay? No more wars, no more problems, no more conflict. Let's find a cure to every disease known to mankind or womankind. That would be my ultimate, okay? And we'll start from there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Me. There's Mahjouba Nowrouzi from Afghan service in BBC World Service. So I would like to ask you, Mr. President, that Afghan president is going to be here.
He's here right now.
He's here. And are you going to meet him? And what have you got to say to him? And when the war is going to end in Afghanistan, because people are fed up now and they want to know.
I agree with that. I very much agree. It's been going on for a long time. We've made a lot of progress, but it's been going on for a long time. We've made a lot of progress in Afghanistan, I will say. Yes, your president is here right now. In fact, he's in the room. When I'm finished with this, I'm going right back into that room.
One question, please. Georgian Public Broadcaster, Mr. President, can you tell us what do you think about future membership of Georgia in NATO, please?
Well, at a certain point, they'll have a chance. Not right now. They just left the room. But at a certain point, they'll have a chance. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Barza Hassan, reporter for Kurdistan 24. Are you going to continue to support the Kurdish forces, Peshmerga, in Iraq? Thank you.
I think the Kurds are great people. They're incredible fighters. They're wonderful, warm, intelligent allies in many cases, as you know. It's different groups of people, but
just checking that Ronald Reagan comment. Reagan won Wisconsin in 1980 and 1984. Maybe I misunderstood what Donald Trump said a moment ago. I'll check.
With ARD German TV.
Yes.
You said Putin isn't an enemy, isn't a friend. It's just a competitor.
A competitor.
Do you consider him as a security threat for Europe or to the U.S.? Thank you.
Hey, I don't want him to be, and that's, I guess, why we have NATO. And that's why we have a United States that just had the largest military budget ever, $700 billion approved, $716 billion next year. No, I hope that we'll be able to get along. I've said from day one, whether it's China or Russia, you know, we're working on trade with China right now. And I don't say that's an easy situation, because that's been years of abuse of the United States by presidents, frankly, that allowed that to happen. So I've taken over a lot of bad hands, and I'm fixing each one of them, and I'm fixing them well. But China is going to be, I think, very successfully, ultimately taken care of. I have a great respect for their president, as you know. President Xi spent 2 days there. It was among the most magical 2 days I've ever lived. And I think we're going to end up doing something very good with China. Right now, we're in a pretty nasty trade battle, but I think ultimately that'll work out. I really think we have a big advantage. You know, we picked up $8 trillion in value and worth since I became president, and we're close to 2 times the size of China. A lot of people don't know that. And, you know, we're going to negotiate a fair deal if that's possible. Okay. And Russia, I think getting along with Russia also would be a very good thing. Yes, go ahead.
Jamal Musawi from BBC Persian TV. We have seen escalation of tension between you and the Iranians. What is your exit plan, Mr. President?
I would say there might be an escalation between us and the Iranians. I agree with
they are threatening.
By the way, they're treating us with much more respect right now than they did in the past. And I know they're having a lot of problems and their economy is collapsing. But I will tell you this, at a certain point, they're going to call me and they're going to say, let's make a deal. And we'll make a deal. But they're feeling a lot of pain right now. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. President, do you expect the rise of the Russian influence in Macedonia following the starting of the negotiation process, like we've seen in Montenegro with alleged coup? And what will NATO and United States do to counter that Russian influence in the Western Balkans?
We never talk about our future plans. Yes, go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Donald Trump has just spent half an hour talking about his future plans. He has no idea what that question about Macedonia and Montenegro was about. Absolutely no clue.
After 2 months election, the government in Iraq has not been formed. What's the role from USA? And you want to talk about Syria with President Putin. Can I have any information about Kurds in Syria? Thank you very much.
So I hope we get along well with Iraq. We've certainly spent a great fortune in Iraq, and many, many lives, thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives, if you think on both sides, which I always think about both sides, not just our side. And they had an election, and I hope we're going to be able to get along, and we'll see how that goes. We've already been talking to the people that won the election. I was not in favor of that war. I was very much against that war. I never thought it was a good thing, but that's another deck of cards that I inherited, and we'll do the best we can with it. I think the election was pretty conclusive. And again, we've spoken to them. We'll see what happens. Yes, sir, go ahead. Go ahead.
To the next event, we have time for one more question.
Good.
I'm Asia Atrous from Asabah newspaper in Tunisia. I come from a very far country, a small country in northern Africa, Tunisia. My question, Mr. President, we really admire what you are doing in North Africa, and we really wish and hope that something again will be done in the Middle East to avoid people more wars and more blood and more killings in the Middle East with a just peace process that gives everyone its...
We're looking for peace, and Africa, as you know, is it's on our very strong list. But we're looking for peace. We want peace all over.
Africa, Donald Trump says, is on his very strong list. Reassuring words there.
Right now has got problems like few people would even understand. They have things going on there that nobody could believe in this room. If you saw some of the things that I see through intelligence, what's going on in Africa, it is so sad and so vicious and violent. And we want peace. We want peace for Africa. We want peace all over the world. That's my number one goal. Peace all over the world.
Possible he thinks Africa is a country rather than a continent.
Tremendous military, because I really believe through strength you get peace. But we're going to have a military like we've never had before. We've given out orders for, you know, the best fighter jets in the world, the best ships, the best everything. But hopefully we'll never have to use them. That would be a dream. To buy the best stuff, to have the best stuff, to have the best equipment in the world, and to never have to use it would be a really great part of my dream. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to be leaving in about a half an hour. Thank you.
Donald Trump very keen to get that press conference done and dusted before Mystery Hour starts at 12 noon. Just checking on a few of those claims. He lied about Wisconsin. Ronald Reagan won Wisconsin in 1980 and 1984. He lied about being opposed to the Iraq war. The public record shows that he did no such thing. I mean, sundry other things that you could pick over, but I think we did a fairly good job as the speech continued. But as I told you would happen, there was a sales pitch for American weapons and not a single syllable of criticism of Vladimir Putin. The United Kingdom Prime Minister is partly in Brussels for this NATO meeting to shore up a response, a continuing response to the Russian government's assault upon British sovereign soil. Attempted murder of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, culminating in the death of a completely innocent bystander. And that, if you're questioning whether or not it happened, then you need to ask Donald Trump why his State Department expelled 60 diplomats immediately after that attack, the Skripal attack. Theresa May is there because our sovereign soil was attacked by Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump offered about 20 opportunities to issue a single syllable of criticism of Vladimir Putin, and criticism came then none. So he will routinely and very ignorantly criticize Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Premier. He will criticize the United Kingdom and Theresa May. He will criticize Angela Merkel. He will criticize all of the leaders of other NATO countries. He will display his weapons-grade ignorance to a degree that leaves us fairly confident he thinks Africa is a country rather than a continent, but not completely confident. He didn't mention any African countries, which I thought was pertinent. The question about Macedonia and Montenegro, where Russian aggression and Russian ambition will perhaps be most acutely felt, he knew nothing of what that journalist was talking about. But he did find time to plug his own businesses in Scotland, one of his own golf resorts in Scotland. He actually plugged it. I mean, direct contravention of anything that remotely resembles an ethical code. And he also managed to drum up an awful lot of business for the American industrial military complex, which is what we said at about 10:30 this morning would be the key point of his foreign policy moving forwards. Holy moly. We've got a couple of minutes left before Mystery Hour. Has Andrew in Weybridge been staying on the line all through? Andrew, you must be mad, mate. Haven't you got anything better to do?
Yeah, you're right. I've got better things to do. But no, actually, listening to you is great, James. And listening to that press conference was unbelievable. A true snake oil salesman.
Yeah.
And what I phoned up about was your previous line of thought about
Putin.
Putin. What Putin's got. I mean, having watched American politics very closely in the last 2 years, doing a lot of research, and looking at the Mueller investigation.
Yes.
It's something that Trump is absolutely, completely fearful about. He is petrified that the Mueller investigation is going to come out with the evidence. It's already got, whatever it is, 21 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and of this Russian collusion, and there is a lot of stuff, I think, to come out. It will come out, whether it comes out before the midterms in November. Who knows? Because it's. But he's trying to do everything possible. But the sad thing is, and listening to some of the comments that he made, because he very rarely gets challenged. Okay, he got challenged on some of the facts he quoted there, and where he talked about, America pays, when it went up to 90% of the cost
down
of
to
NATO,
70.
it's actually 23 or something like this. It's about a quarter of the percent. Europe actually pays, combined a significant figure of the total budget for NATO. But
I think the one thing everyone can agree on is that other member countries should be paying more as a percentage of their GDP. Yeah. But it's amazing how he doesn't mention the NATO soldiers who've been serving in Afghanistan, the response to the September the 11th attacks upon New York being NATO coordinated. Yeah. It's breathtaking, his ignorance, except it's not anymore, is it? It's par for the course.
Because he is breathtakingly ignorant. But I mean, it's regarding the Mueller thing, the thing that I suppose makes me sad, or worried about the whole situation, because you just think he's becoming he would love to become a dictator, because this is why he admires Putin, Kim Jong-un, Erdogan, President Xi, who's now lifetime president in China. But he likes these really, really strong characters, because he's actually on record as saying that he would love to be able to have complete control of the Department of Justice, the FBI, CIA, and dictate what they should be investigating. He wanted to put his opponent in jail. He said this during his press conference.
You've covered a lot of ground, and I know I kept you waiting, but the news is now a little late, so I shall bid you farewell, Andrew, and remind everybody that it's Mystery Hour after this. So, I mean, pretty much textbook, really, that Donald Trump intervention in NATO. He came to NATO, he created a crisis, he claimed that he'd fixed it, and then he laid the basis for an ongoing set of mutually contradictory commitments and misunderstandings, just as he did in North Korea, effectively, although that particular press conference was peppered with more untruths, even by Donald Trump standards, claiming that Ronald Reagan didn't win Wisconsin. He won it twice. And then, amazingly, claiming effectively that Barack Obama should have stopped Vladimir Putin from annexing Crimea, an annexation, of course, that was undertaken using military force. So, presumably, he thinks that America should have gone to war with Russia when Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea, but he declined the opportunity to condemn the annexation of Crimea and explained that America would never recognize it. Oh, and he lied about being opposed to the Iraq War as well. Apart from that, crazy speech. Let's get Mystery Hour underway, because he was under very strict instructions to get that press conference completed by 12 noon. Mystery Hour very, 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 very rarely gets postponed. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. My thanks to Michelle, who has paid me what any British broadcaster would probably consider to be the finest compliment that any British broadcaster can ever be paid. She says, your commentary over Trump's speech is the political version of Terry Wogan's interventions at the Eurovision Song Contest. Michelle, even if I hadn't finished my book last night, I would be going home particularly happy today as a result of those kind words.